Hello, hello, hello. I'm HoJo.
And I'm Hunnsy.
And welcome to this. A bit of a special, isn't it, Hunnsy?
It's our first special. This is the moment people have been waiting for.
The moment you and I have been waiting for. We decided that we were going to do a bonus episode based around Lååz Rockit vocalist Michael Coons and the infamous Howard Johnson Sucks Dick t-shirt, because we'd spent all that time trying to track him down to his cocktail lounge in Hollywood. And all of a sudden we went, crikey, we've got about 3/4 of an hour of absolute interview gold. So we thought, why not be the nicest host of any single-digit listener hard rock podcast in the world and give everybody the chance to hear 45 minutes. Now, how much fun was it talking to Michael?
It was amazing. He likes to chat, doesn't he? He wasn't reserved. He was very opinionated, but lovely. He talked about lots of stuff around his career. He talked about the incident. He talked about what he does now. But let him tell you all that. I'm not going to give it all away now, am I?
So not only do you get the full story of the Sucks Dick t-shirt, you get a little trawl into his bizarre life as a wannabe footballer. Isn't that weird? Anyway, enough of our yakking. It's time to let Michael take centre stage for 45 minutes of pure magic. So, Hunnsy.
Yes, HoJo.
I can barely contain my excitement. Do you remember back on episode 2 of HoJo and Hunnsy's Hard Rock House, where we told a slightly naughty story about a little contretemps that I had with a metal band from the west coast of America by the name of Lååz Rockit? And you and I were very, very keen to see if we could tempt with a little bit of cheese Michael Coons, the vocalist of Lååz Rockit, out of his lair on the west coast of America to discuss what was, frankly, one of the greatest moments of my rock and roll writing career, probably the greatest accolade I've ever received, which was a t-shirt with the words Howard Johnson Sucks Dick on it. We worked hard. We managed to locate Michael, and I am beyond excited to say that he is the first interview on HoJo and Hunnsy's Hard Rock House.
I can't believe we've got him. I genuinely cannot believe we've got the man responsible for the Dick t-shirts. He is here. Let's get him on.
Michael, we are beyond thrilled to have you. Genuinely, it's more than a pleasure to welcome you to our podcast. We could have had David Lee Roth. We could have had Paul Stanley. We could have had Jimmy Page. We turned them all down because we wanted you.
It's an honor setting the bar low.
Let's do a little bit of scene setting. Can you give us just a quick potted history of how you ended up as the lead singer of Lååz Rockit, who were, to many people, and this is not joking, one of the leading lights of the West Coast thrash scene?
I was in high school and my life revolved around football, soccer. Mm-hmm. And I lived in Cambridge, England in 1974 as a little boy. My dad taught at the university there for a semester. So I discovered that game and I was quite good at it. So as I entered high school, I wanted to grow my hair like Kevin Keegan. So that sort of spurred on a couple aspiring rock guys to look at me on the soccer field and say, that guy's got cool hair. I shit you not. And that's how my foray as a junior in high school, as a 16-year-old, and it was a cover band. Along the way, I had a very, very good friend who was a year behind me in school, whose sister worked for Bill Graham. Do you remember Bill Graham?
Yeah,
the rock promoter, yeah. So we would get tickets to shows, and we'd go see Day on the Green or bands like everything from Blue Oyster Cult to Heart to 38 Special, Leonard Skinner, whatever. When I was a senior, my best friend and I, this guy Craig Bearhorst, who's in a band called Ruffians, we started to form a metal band when I was a senior in high school. So we're very young, and I noticed that metal was getting me laid more than soccer. So that was an important point. Remember, we lived in the 80s, so getting laid was probably number one because I was a marginal singer, but I was a very, very good soccer player. So I was actually pursued by a lot of colleges. Lååz Rockit first started summer of 82. I mean, we sort of started in 81, and then I graduated from high school. We played our first club shows, and I think our drummer had just finished his freshman year in high school. We were kids, playing in nightclubs, a Bill Graham nightclub, actually, in San Francisco. And it was so exciting that I said, you know what? After the rigors of high school, just like I need a little time off. I'm going to give this band thing a year And so I didn't go to the college that I was enrolled in. I knew I was going to fail. All I wanted to do was play soccer. I was like, I didn't want to go to class. So I backed out of it. I said, I'll give myself a year. And during that year, we developed a local following in the Bay Area. And it got 500 people to 700 people to a couple thousand people. I was 18. We had a lot of high school friends at different high schools and word of mouth, and people could get into shows.
Was that thrash scene starting to evolve as well? So like other bands like Exodus and Testament and Death Angel, were they all part of that scene as well?
Us and Exodus specifically. I remember we played a show in a park with around a bunch of like picnic tables at like 18 years old in lovely Richmond, California, when Gary had just joined the band. Tom was in the band too, and we were all kids. We were all 18. You know, a lot of the other bands from that Bay Area scene came after us and Exodus, The Testament, Violence, all these other bands. These were guys who were coming to our shows. Yeah, and thinking we were, I hate to use the word influential, but in some ways we were, because we were the ones up on that stage playing the shows. And we weren't that much older than them.
Were you doing like originals then, or were you doing covers, or what were you doing?
Yes, unfortunately, we were doing originals. Yes, you can ask Howard about that. People still really like City's Gonna Burn and stuff like that. And I mean, I could barely tell a story. I was a kid, you know what I mean? And so I look at some of the lyrics and I'm like, oh my God. But that's the power of music and the power of that time. And a lot of kids were moving towards that high energy. Guitar players all wanted to be that guitar hero. And it was very addicting. We were constantly playing shows. And of course, there was a great club scene in the Bay Area now. And I feel bad for a lot of bands coming up these days, because they're all playing about, the size of the couch behind me. But we would play clubs that actually had stages and you could put on a show. And the one thing that we could do very well was bring a high energy show start to finish. Whether or not we were accomplished or good yet, or any of those kind of things, we certainly looked at it as a privilege rather than a right.
So what would you say would be considered your big break? What was the thing that kind of took you out of doing very well locally and being influential on that early emerging Bay Area thrash scene to take you to being, okay, here's a band that's going to get a record deal, here's a band that's going to get out on tour and go beyond the boundaries of what they know?
There was a show we played at the Keystone Berkeley, and we were a special guest for a band from LA, and that went on and did some things. We were a special guest for Rat. We played a show with them, and it was on their EP, That You Think You're Tough thing. Yeah. And so we had the ability at that point to really draw a lot of people on our own.
Okay.
But we were on that bill, and I think we sold out. I'd have all the high school friends. My little sister was still in high school. Tell everybody to spend $3.50 to come see us. And so anyway, we could sometimes pick and choose bands that we could play a special guest for. And it was interesting that night that we played, we had a really good show, and Marshall Burl was there, and that was Milton Berle's nephew.
Yeah.
And he looked at the crowd and the reaction to us, and he took an interest in us. He had that label called Target Entertainment.
Yeah.
And that was with the first Rat, and then they moved on to Atlantic, yada, yada. And so he actually offered us a deal almost that night. And, it's as record deals go, we all know that there was probably not much to it, but but it was fascinating to be a 19-year-old and get that offer. And if I might segue back, Metallica had been getting ready to do Kill 'Em All. And the very first show we played with Metallica, actually, they were our special guest in San Francisco on October 18th, 1982. And that's how our relationship started. And we played a bunch of shows together, but we would hang out all the time. When they moved to the Bay Area, Cliff wouldn't move. He didn't want to live in LA. But the best thing about that show, I remember, is I had an apartment with a garbage man and a sailboat salesman. And both those guys got up early. I didn't do much. That's, the party was ending, was they gave me dirty looks and went to work. That night was great because the Rat guys came down, almost the entire club came down to my apartment, and I wound up, we were, annihilated, and I wound up driving golf balls into the neighborhood off the lawn at like 3:30 a.m. with Robin Crosby and a couple other people, and the girls with the big hairspray ducking out of the way.
If only we'd had camera phones then. And
oh my God!
Can you imagine if that had been recorded?
I'd be recording this from prison, most likely. If that was the case. But
it's worse than that, Michael. You're recording it with us.
Yeah, there you go. We had played a couple shows down here. I reside in Los Angeles now and have for 20 years. You look back at it and it was, here we go. And that's how that initial thing of being exposed to, or having someone want to expose us to beyond the Bay Area, beyond California or whatever. And we were definitely more than ready for it, for the experience, whether we were ready for it or not, musically, spiritually, whatever kind of shit you want to say. But, we were kids. We were just kids. And I was still a teenager.
Okay. So the question that springs to mind to me is, you're 19 years old. You've managed to build up a following that, frankly, if you're a rock band in the UK, when we were growing up around about the same time, we were almost at identical age, was very, very difficult to do. There just wasn't that level of interest in rock music. Most people in England, if you've spent any time there, like you did in 74, you realise it's a very minority sport, rock music. Whereas, I think a lot of the time Americans get the feeling that the UK was a hotbed of rock activity because so many rock bands came out of it, but it wasn't really like that at all. The idea that we would get 500 people to come and see a local band was just impossible. It just couldn't happen. So, were you at that age of 19 when Marshall Burl's getting involved and Target Records are interested? Are you thinking, I'm going to be a rock star?
I'm thinking there's a good possibility. I had 2 feet in the pool. College was certainly out the window. Signed something, and it was a crap contract. And ironically, my dad was a contract law professor. And he's got it like,
and he let you sign it.
Well, I was over 18, so he couldn't prevent me. I was no longer a minor.
Yeah.
But we all said, let's get on this train and see where it takes us. And to tell you the honest truth, I did not think I would get a 12-year ride on it and see the world. But I want to piggyback on something that you said that's very interesting, what you said about England, because to most of us in that thrash scene in the Bay Area, we were looking to you guys. Your music magazines were the good ones. But back in the day, when your access was to either, for myself, either international soccer magazines or music magazines, was the newspaper store or whatever. It was someone who specialized in that.
Did you read World Soccer magazine?
I did indeed.
Well, that's good, because I was a freelance contributor to World Soccer for about 20 years.
Shit.
Well. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I got to play with George Best once.
Wow.
Did you get to drink with him as well or not?
He was a surly fuck, I'll tell you that. No, okay. I was only like 15. I was only 15. Also had breakfast with Pele once, which was
are you gonna drop any more names?
Yes. So anyway.
Did you notice how unimpressed we were with the fact that you knocked around with Cliff Burton, but the minute you said you'd had breakfast with Pele,
you were hitting golf balls with Robin Crosby from Rats. Like, yeah, whatever.
Yes, exactly.
You had breakfast with Pele. I just shit my pants.
The way that we looked at it, your country, your influence, what you guys were experiencing was the pinnacle.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. There were American bands that we like, but just the pictures in Kerrang or these other sounds. But we would dig to find these metal magazines to, see what T-shirts they're wearing, to see, you're developing, you're very easily influenced at that age, clearly. But for us, it's amazing to me because I thought that those bands from your area were much more above anything we could possibly do.
I always thought like all the coolest bands came from America. You know, going to a record shop in England and buying an American import album. No word of a lie. I used to buy records from American bands if they looked good on the front cover. I bought like the first two Kicks albums because I thought they looked cool.
Well, hold it. Whoa. You said you bought those because you thought they looked good.
I thought Kicks were like.
That's going to segue into something else. I feel.
I bought those first two Kicks records based on what they looked like on the front cover. Any American imports for me were like just super cool, you know. But you probably had the same thing about British bands, so it worked both.
Totally.
It was a smoke and mirrors thing. Kerrang
Exactly.
had a cachet. Whenever I used to get sent to America to do stories on bands in the good old days when record companies couldn't wait to throw money at you to fly to the other side of the world to interview a group, it was amazing to me that Kerrang had such kudos in the States. People knew that magazine, loved that magazine, and probably really didn't understand that we were very much an outlier in the UK. The magazine made money for the publishers, but really it was because nobody spent any money on production values. You know, it was cheap to make. The writers were all doing it for the love of it. Nobody was getting paid anything really worth talking about. And so you could make good money if you were a publisher of that magazine, even though you were probably only selling, you know, at its height, probably Kerrang was selling 70,000 copies.
That's astonishing to me because it was almost looked at as a biblical, you had to get it to beat the other people into your knowledge, because it became sort of like Jeopardy or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like to find these bands or to find these things to talk about or to try and find, so that when somebody brought it up at the club or at the gig, and there were gigs every night back in San Francisco in that time, you could go see. We were very fortunate. You could see, quote unquote, the competition and see what was going on. But, you know, if you had knowledge of, have you heard of this band or this, blah, 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 you know, like you guys did professionally, musicians do the same thing, or guys in bands do the same thing in a way.
Professionally. I was just going to ask, actually, Michael, was the Holy Grail getting like a feature or a review or something in Kerrang?
It was the source of the most knowledgeable. Being the son of a law professor, my dad was very specific about how we wrote and spoke. And I enjoyed the vernacular and the writing of the English magazines as opposed to the American ones. Now, it was great to be in Circus. It was great. I was super stoked when we actually had a little article on Cream in Cream later. You know, it's to make that magazine, because that one had some humor to it and blah, blah, blah. But as far as definition and making you think, you had a link to language and how to look at things differently than the American magazines.
What I know looking back on Kerrang, I was there from right at the start, the 7th issue, for about 10 years. And I saw the evolution of the magazine. But what I do know about Kerrang and what gave it its cachet was the fact that it was genuinely written by people who loved the music, but like we also discussed, people who saw how funny it could be. Do you remember when they used to have those articles like Wanger of the Week, and, you know, people who were sticking a piece of salami in tinfoil down their trousers and all that kind of stuff. And Kerrang was beautifully honest and naive, because if we'd known at the time the power that we had, because I never thought about that when I was writing. I never thought whatever I write, that's going to make a band, you know, help a band get a deal. It's going to put 10,000 record sales on it. I never, ever once thought about that. I just wrote what I felt about the music that I was listening to. And I think that was the really important part of Kerrang. And there was no control within the publishing company, because the people who were the publishers didn't know the first fucking thing about rock music, and all they knew was, this thing doesn't cost us any money to make.
Right.
Those hairy people over in the corner are making a lot of noise, but they seem to know what they're doing, because the sales And
Yeah.
so they just left us alone. Now you're an older person and you can look back on it and you can go, fucking hell, how naive was I? They were making money hand over fist out of Kerrang, and I was barely paying my rent. But
Yeah.
in many ways, I'm glad it was that way, because it was very pure, and the way that we wrote about the music and the love that we had for it and the passion that we felt about being associated with what we all believe was the premier metal magazine was
Well,
really important to us.
There were so many of these homemade little fanzine. A friend of ours, Ron Quintana, in San Francisco, and he was very tight with the Metallica guys, and he was a big collector, and had a little.
I started writing a fanzine. That's how I got my break.
Yeah, and you get these little, metal rendezvous from a guy named John Stradansky, and that I'm still in touch with, and it was funny because I would always somehow forge some form of alliance with the overseas, these little fancies things through soccer, because I'd lived in the former West Germany for the first half of 1974, and then the second half we were in Cambridge.
And they won the World Cup in '74, of course.
Yes, they did. And that's when I was introduced to the sport. But so I could bring that up to you guys to help forge a relationship with the band as well. Like the other guys, they couldn't give a shit about that sport. But I would meet with the writers. I'd say, I've actually been to where you were born. I've actually been to your country. I've actually, just these little things. But these people were, as you were saying, I love how you touched on the point that you're barely paying your rent, you're barely doing this stuff, but you're immersed in what you want to be doing. And I respect that for anybody, no matter what. As you get older, things change in terms of trying to take care of things and blah, 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 blah. But at that age, I think we were all very fortunate to be that age at that time, at that scene. I
was a fan at that time, right? I haven't got the writing background that HoJo's got. But Kerrang for me was, I look back now and I go, I used to believe it. I actually, I probably read stuff that my great long-time friend here on the podcast wrote, that it might have been an album review or whatever. I didn't know who he was from Adam. The journalists on Kerrang at that time, they were almost like an extension of a rock star. If it was Jeff Barton was writing a review about a band and you knew that everything that Jeff Barton had written that you'd bought was great, you believed what Jeff Barton said. You kind of trusted them because the way that they wrote, they came across as fans. They wrote about the music and you got a sense that it was coming from a love for the music. You read it and went, that sounds good.
It does dovetail nicely into the fact that this is really the core of what we're here to talk about, is that come 1987, 3 albums in for you in Lååz Rockit, our paths crossed for the first time. So tell me when you first became aware of what I'd written in Kerrang, and what was the reaction of the band?
I couldn't have been more excited to know that Kerrang was actually going to review a record of ours.
Oh, for shame.
Somehow the first 2 had, I think on the first 2 there wasn't much attention because we hadn't been to Europe yet.
Yeah.
And in 86, 85, good God, I've had too many soccer balls. We went to Europe for the first time, and we played this string of like 6 shows, opening for Motorhead, Manowar, and Exciter. And so we got a taste of what Europe was about. And we played with Motorhead a couple club shows in San Francisco, so kind of had a little knew them, but we saw what this was all about, and it had a big influence on us to actually play in Europe and get a really good response, for our piddly 28 to 33 minute set. So when I had heard that we were, the review was coming up, some people, still like Know Your Enemy is the best record you ever did. There are cringy moments for me as well on that record. I think any artist has a few of those, or did I just say artist? Good God. Just delete that.
Of course you
delete that shit. I was very excited, and we open it up, and I start to read, And the writing is really good. I have to admit.
Oh, don't say that.
Your vernacular
Don't say that.
in destroying us,
Right, okay.
was Nagasaki. With my mouth agape, I was just like, holy smoke, this is bad. This is not a good review, guys. And you know, I think I went out and stared at the sky for a minute and said, okay, well, you know, we'll get them the next album. You know, it's sort of like, we'll get them the next album, whatever.
So obviously Kerrang had a K rating for these.
Yes.
Right. So obviously 5Ks was buy it now, it's brilliant.
Yes.
And obviously, you know, 4, 3, 2, 1 decreasing in opinion. Do you remember what K Mr. Johnson gave you on this particular?
By having a little bit of research, yes, there was a reluctant 1K, I believe, a very reluctant 1K, simply because it's, you know, there was an ink cost, there was a time cost, and there was a getting through the editor cost.
Yeah.
So instead, you know what? It's, you know,
and he had to give it something.
He had to prove that he'd actually listened to it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why he gave it 1K. He had to prove that he'd actually listened, probably all the way through, even too. So
exactly.
And Michael, it's brilliant because obviously people listening to the podcast won't be able to see, but I have gone a very bright shade of red. Even though it's not about going, I didn't like your record, because I didn't like your record, but it's still, after so many years, you talk to somebody and it's so easy when it's not hiding behind a pen, because I would have, even at the time, I was quite good at saying to people, if I met them, I'm sorry, I just didn't like your record. And I also particularly hope that in the majority of, I think probably I couldn't say that about every album I ever reviewed at Kerrang when I was, you know, I was 22 years old at that point. I couldn't say it about every album I did, but 90% of the albums, I'm very glad to say, I look back on them and it wasn't personal about the people.
Sure.
I don't think, I'm sure there are some examples of it, but I don't think in general it was in my nature to be mean to the people. It was just, I kept it to the music. If I really didn't like the music, sure, I had to say it, because I also felt that I had a responsibility to the readership of when they listened to my reviews and they knew what my tastes were, that if I was lying about what I thought about something, that was a real disservice to them. So, you know,
integrity.
I kind of felt that I had integrity like that, but that doesn't alter the fact that when you're actually face to face with the person who put their heart and soul into that and clearly meant every word that they said and meant every chord that was played, it's never comfortable when you have to go, I'm very sorry, but I didn't like it. But that's why I was so thrilled and heartened when I realized that you had the same attitude that we did to looking back now, and we're prepared to come on and talk to us about it, because obviously there is the rejoinder that you guys came back at me with, which was well, I'll let you explain what you decided. How did you decide that you were going to retaliate to my really negative review?
Surely you had to call an immediate band meeting.
We were managed by a guy who was our age too. He was a guy who was like, I want to be Peter Grant. You know what I mean? Who envisioned himself at 22 as knowledgeable as, you know, Led Zeppelin's manager, and hence the Peter Grant thing, and someone who aspired to be that type of person, which probably should have been a warning to begin with. That's kind of how we took criticism, you know, in a way, because we were young and, you know, we wanted to be tough, and that dude insulted you. Or so let's just say that there were times in our history where we looked for opportunities to perhaps react childishly and relish these moments of how we're gonna, you know, whatever sort of teenage movie, toilet paper the house or whatever. I was looking more forward to playing Leeds Hall. The T-shirts idea had come out, and I'm not sure. I would have to refer to my guitar player. Those shirts were made when we got there, or we brought them with us. I'm not entirely sure. But I was, to tell you the honest truth, the Get Back at You, HoJo, was obviously the T-shirt.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, a couple of the guys could wear them, but, or if you feel like, but it was mandated for all of us to wear this. Just so you know, it was mandated.
And remind our single-digit listeners, Michael, what did the T-shirt say?
It said, Howard Johnson sucks dick. And I was a little like, well, people are going to take photos of, do we have to wear them the whole show? Can I change the shirt? Can we bring it out at the end? Say we get an encore, which is probably unlikely. But anyway, can we wear them? But there was, we unified around it. Like, this was an important thing for some fucking reason. I can't even remember that we would do it. I think each photo that might have appeared in some other magazines or whatever, they were full photos of the shirt. It was it wasn't like a over UCK, you know what I mean? There was not one that wasn't like half readable. Brilliant. They were all, and to tell you honest, here we are sitting face to face for the first time in our lives.
Ever.
And I honestly was like, I'm going to apologize to that dude at some point. If I don't care how other people see it, but for me personally, it was funny because even then, I've got this damn thing called a conscience that every now and then gets me, and that's why it's amazing to be sitting here with you, HoJo. In a way, I think HoJo and I have been linked together for over 3 decades.
By sucking dick. Yes.
By a T-shirt
Michael
that appeared for 35 minutes from the second up band or third up band at a festival in Leeds in 1987.
Brilliant, isn't it? It's brilliant.
That's what's so amazing about it. But
I agree.
Let me ask you, Michael, can you remember who decided that would be the phrase? And were there any others? Did you have a checklist? Howard Johnson sucks cock. Howard Johnson bones. Whatever. Was it? Oh, no, that can't. No, that's the one.
It was. I think they knew I probably would have some trepidation for that. I think it was presented. It was almost a presented and mandate. Here's your shirt for the game,
right?
And you're going to be wearing this. And it's kind of funny. Because of that shirt, later on, the manager had another idea for a brilliant T-shirt. And it was, I think, around 91, 90 or something like that, maybe 92. And it was going to be our tour shirt. We're going to do a black and orange Dayglow shirt on the heels of the success of the Howard Johnson sucks dick reaction. 4 years later or whatever, the tour shirt said, Lååz Rockit, gargle my sack. You never saw that shirt?
No.
Please,
okay.
Please tell me you've got some still available.
Jesus Christ, can we come up with something that actually sells the music besides these ridiculous inflammatory fucking craziness? That shirt turned out to be the highest selling.
There you go.
That we had, and I had mine with me at the time. There's a famous photographer you may know, Niels Lozauer.
Yeah.
And he shot a bunch of our stuff about, and I was at his studio. I forget, for some reason, in comes Alice Cooper. Sorry about the name dropping again.
No, it's not fucking Pele, is it?
Yeah.
Pele now.
So he walks in, and I'm like, I was probably just hanging out, ligging as usual, ligging at the photography studio. There you go. Yeah. And Neil introduced he said, this is Michael Coons. He's the singer in Lååz Rockit. And Alice Cooper turned and smiled to me. And he goes, gargle my sack, dude. And I was just amazed. And I said, excuse me for 1 second. And I went and I grabbed my personal one and I gave it to him. And he said, oh, you don't have to do this. And I said, it's an honor.
Oh.
Take the shirt.
Can you imagine how embarrassed you would have been if Alice had come in and went, gargle my sack, and you went, I'll give you the t-shirt. He went, no, that was just a request.
Exactly. But he got this smile on his face, clearly a fan of the shocking things to make you aware of what was going on.
On the infamous show at Leeds, right, where the aforementioned t-shirt was revealed, did you at the time, did you reveal to the crowd why you were wearing the t-shirt? And
I can't remember.
I wasn't at that show, but I do remember, as I mentioned, there was a review in Metal Forces magazine by a guy called Mike Exley, where he pretty much went, I thought the band were really good, gave a high energy show from first minute to last, and he really liked that. And he said, I loved the bite back against the review that had been in Kerrang, and the crowd seemed to enjoy it too. And obviously I wasn't there, so I don't really know how that manifested itself. But I was very much, even at the time, I remember thinking to myself, hey, mate, if you want to dish it out, you better be prepared to take it. And I remember being very, certainly not offended by it in any way. I kind of went, you know what?
Good for you, man. Good for you.
I've said what I have to say. If the band want to have their say, that and that's the platform that they have to do it, then good luck to them. I guess one of the things that springs to mind now is, I don't want to sound overly PC about it now, but would you have chosen a different phrase now? We were all guilty of that. I always thought that metal was a really good environment because it was very accepting, and actually the homophobia element of what you might interpret that comment to be was not a part of the world that I inhabited. You know, it wasn't an issue for people to be gay, and yet I think I would have used phrases like that without thinking very much about it, and certainly without in any way wanting to be offensive to gay people. But I think times have changed now. I certainly wouldn't use that phrase now as an insult, because I'd go, that's somebody's lifestyle choice, has nothing to do with it. Do you look at that in the same way?
You know, it's amazing going deeper into a t-shirt in 1987, but I appreciate the fact that you would think that I could handle a question like that. There are many, many, many things that I look back on and cringe at times, that little, oh, Jesus. And I think most people do in life. But I think in retrospect, it's funny because being a band from San Francisco or whatever, or being a cosmopolitan thing, we were subjected to different alternative lifestyles my entire life. My entire life. Now, had we been from another less accepting of that reality part of my particular country or another part of the world, there might have been more to it underlying in a sense of that. I think it was a flippant term. I wasn't part of the board meeting on the discussion of the t-shirt. So, I would have offered probably an alternative scenario, because I would have probably, even at that age, approached it just like you're talking about now. But I have to say that when I got that Facebook message from you, there was something about and what we're doing now that is just so cathartic and cool and adult, and still saying, go out, be those aggressive kids, play the music, do all this kind of stuff. But I think it shows that later on that you can actually be cool with each other too. It doesn't have to be a lifetime of divisiveness because of something like a t-shirt or a review.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a big reason why I decided to do this. I haven't talked about Lååz Rockit or done any interviews in 13 years. This is the first time I've done it in 13 years. I didn't know that.
I can only assume you're tremendously disappointed with the way it's gone.
No, it's fantastic. I think it was I think it was.
And now you know why you didn't want to do interviews.
It was the perfect one to do, because there are times I feel a little bit bad. You know, there's a Facebook page, and there are people who love this band, and there are people come to, you know, Brazil, you know, two of the members, original members, you know, of the cast crew passed away, tragic circumstances. Another former member who replaced a member passed away. There's no doing it again. You know what I mean? For this band, it's nice that people want to relive this kind of stuff. And the way we went out, you know, James Hetfield called me and said, be part of our 30th anniversary at the Fillmore. We'd love you to be a special guest at one of those shows. And that was the best way to end it. I don't need to feed that ego or any of that kind of stuff. But I think it's something magical. And I'm not just trying to overstate this. And I really hope that you guys are successful. You have a great vibe, even on a small desktop, just looking at you dudes. I think that there was something bigger about you reaching out to me, asking me this, and there was zero hesitation. But I said, I'm going to do this. And so you're the first ones in 13 years.
After we had that first conversation about the negative review and the funny T-shirts, Andy went away and listened to the music, and he came back to me and went, what are you fucking talking about? They are magnificent.
I remember Lååz Rockit at the time, right? And the one thing that always intrigued me, where did the name come from? I was a big fan of Metallica in the early days. So I was into that whole sort of thrash scene. And I looked at you guys and I went, just the name doesn't sound like a thrash band. So it almost sounded more like a sort of LA sleazy glam band, especially the way that you spelt it with the Z and the why did you split the umlaut?
I love the frustration. You're laughing, HoJo, and I love the frustration in his face.
Don't split the umlaut. Have like two proper umlauts. If you're gonna have an umlaut, have two of them. Like with two umlauts. Don't split the one umlaut.
You fucking amateurs.
I mean, so basically, what I'm saying, Michael, is that I wasn't warming to the band because of the name. You never really cut through with me. We talked about this, and I said, right, I'm going to go and revisit, and I'm going to go and listen to them. And in all seriousness, I called him. I went, "Fuck, they were good, man."
This is awesome. I really appreciate what you're saying, because to this day, probably from the mental scars of that 1K Kerrang review that I got back in '87, I would say that when people ask about the band, and it's very funny because of, you know, clearly the way I look now or whatever, and I'm dealing with the Princess of Bahrain coming into the hotel or whoever, you know, the Enmar of Kuwait or these types of whatever, they have no idea of the absolute astonishingly ridiculously ugly past of the guy making them their cocktails. The visual fits. But anyway, I was gonna say, I don't bleed it out. And then someone, do you know that guy was in a band? Do you know? And then people, Jesus Christ, and they look at the photos or whatever. Wash your hands. But anyway, I was gonna say the one thing that I always say, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, is I always lead with the fact that I thought, and I still think, we were never afraid to open for anybody, and we were a great live band.
Are any of the T-shirts in circulation? Do you know where they are? Any idea?
Yeah, I mean, I'll get you guys a couple for sure.
Oh, brilliant.
About the name thing, the Lååz Rockit thing. When we were sort of banding about the name, this, that, otherwise, you know, all of us with our deep thinking 16, 17-year-old minds about how we're going to come across with something that really represents the future of metal and the next 25 years of dominance of whatever. But there was a Clint Eastwood movie called The Enforcer. And it had to deal with Alcatraz, and we're a San Francisco band or blah, blah, blah. And at the end, he shoots the bad guy in the tower with a Lååz rocket. It's called the Lååz rocket.
Brilliant.
There you go.
So for whatever reason, that sounded cool. And then, but the spelling looked a little weird with the logos. And so, you know, the other super accomplished 18 or 19-year-old artist is, the they came up with, oh, well, I'm going to change it around. And of course, when you're 18 and it's metallic silver and it's got more than one umlaut, it sells itself, right?
I love that.
You have to have a sense of humor about life. Clearly, you guys do. And I am enjoying this immensely. I have to say that. And it's cathartic for me to speak about this kind of stuff again. It's funny how the different subject matters appear to be so relevant still to some people when, like, I've put this on the shelf for 13 years and, would never have passed up this opportunity. Again, with gratitude, I'm really enjoying this.
When we went, we're going to reach out. Because when you do that kind of thing, you know that you're either going to get someone who tells you to fuck off because he's still angry. Or if they agree to talk to you, it's because somewhere there's a meeting of minds.
It's been brilliant.
I've enjoyed the vibe of this, the humanness of how this all came together. You guys are great.
I need a T-shirt that says Howard Johnson sucks dick on it.
If HoJo's okay with that, it's a sort of friendship. This was really enjoyable, and I thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay.
Why did you split the umlaut? All right, I'll let you go.
Well, HoJo, how was that for you, considering that the main topic was someone declaring that you suck dick?
He was tremendous, wasn't he? Michael was such good value, and he had completely the right attitude, didn't he? He found it funny, slightly embarrassing. Obviously, we're different people than we were 40 years ago. Wouldn't use that kind of language anymore, but it was funny. He was a very charming man. He looked back on it with great humour, and both of us had a lot of affection. And of course, the fact that it was the first time that either he or I had spoken ever about an incident that has become quite legendary in the world of metal.
Hang on, it's become legendary in our world of metal. Nobody else had ever heard of it before we start this bloody podcast.
Give it time, Hunnsy, give it time.
All
but
right,
a lot of fun,
okay.
And we thought it was worthwhile letting everybody hear the full unexpurgated interview if they'd already listened to the shortened version on HoJo and Hunnsy's regular Hard Rock House. So there you go. Who knows? It may be something that we'll do again in the future.
Definitely, and I'm very looking forward to what Michael promised. He's going to send us T-shirts, isn't he?
Do you think he might let us down, though? Because in the heat of the moment, he said, I'll send you a Lååz Rockit T-shirt. But do you think he might forget all about us, that we ever existed?
Nah, I'm backing him. He came across as an honest, decent bloke, so I think he will send us the T-shirts. We will receive the said T-shirts. We will take photographs of us wearing the said T-shirts, and we will post them on all our socials. So keep an eye out for that.
Anyway, hope you all enjoyed 45 minutes of unexpurgated Michael Coons, Lååz Rockit. We'll see you all very soon.
See ya. Bye.